Hello, welcome to Qt Quick 3D in Qt Design Studio. I'm Thomas Hartmann, Senior Manager for R&D, and I lead the Berlin team for Qt Design Studio, and I'm also the lead developer. This talk is about using Qt Quick 3D and 3D in general in Qt Design Studio. Most of this presentation will be a demo. What we will build is what you see here on the right. We will build a small app that is actually modeled in 3D, but the different parts are actually coming from 2D, and they directly resemble a 2D UI. For this, I will show how to import 3D objects. I will show how to set up a 3D view, set up materials, lights and cameras, and I will also show how to use 2D elements in a 3D scene. So how to basically use Qt Quick items in a 3D scene in Qt Quick 3D. And last but not least, I will show how to animate 3D and 2D elements in conjunction. And the result will be like a nice animation, like an intro animation of what you see here on the right. So this is Qt Design Studio, the welcome page. And the first thing I do is I create a new project. And I create a Qt Quick 3D application because we want to have 3D content. And yeah, I give it a name. And then, yeah, I create the project and now it loads a bit. So we have to wait a second. And yeah, this is the default screen created by the wizard that already creates a cube. It's still a bit loading, that's why it's still not reacting. Yeah, we have this preview here of the cube model. There's a cube material. I just can change this. So the material, you see that in the navigator on the left, is its own item. Also, I can change the resolution of the 2D canvas, the rectangle that is the root item here. I do that so I have a bit more space to have a smaller screen. Yeah, and now we have this View 3D scene inside with a camera that I delete. I will add a new camera because I want an orthographic camera and not a perspective one. Yeah, I do that. Now we have the new camera, which is orthogonal. And we can use the property editor to move around, for example, the cube. But we also have a 3D view. I don't dock that for now, but this could also be docked with a dock widget system. And that is a 3D view on the scene, while basically what we see in the form editor is the projection inside the 2D scene. Yeah, and I can move around the cube here. And of course, I can also rotate it. I also see the light and the camera. You can zoom in and out. So this is basically where you build your scene. And yeah, now I remove the cube. I also remove the text because I want to import a custom model. I will show that in Blender. So this is my custom model, which already resembles the UI that I want to create. So it's a 3D representation of that. And I import that from the Assets tab, add new asset. Luckily, I'm already at the correct folder. Yeah, there are lots of settings here. We don't have to touch anything. We could optimize the mesh or the scene graph, but we don't want to do that. And this will convert now the FBX file from Blender into our custom format, which consists of really a custom optimized format for the meshes, and the scene graph is represented in QML. We will see that soon. So now it's importing. It's mostly converting the meshes and generating the QML file. Okay, great. Now it's done. And yeah, nothing changed here because it's not part of the project yet or part of the document, but it's part of the project, and we will have a look. So we go to projects and it's now imported here and we can open it. So now I will open the 3D scene. Now you might be a tiny bit confused that we don't see anything in the form editor, but because this is a pure 3D scene, this is expected. And if I go to the 3D editor, now I see the scene. And yeah, oh, I destroyed it, but luckily we have undo. Yes, this is the model from Blender, and it consists of these planes. And on each plane, I want to project the UI later and animate it. Okay, I remove the camera and the light because I don't want the camera and light here because we already have one in the scene in the upwards. I don't want this in the component. And yeah, we have one material for everything right now. So one material that's applied to all the parts, to all the objects. I can change the color. But what I want to do now is I want to assign to each plane, to each UI part, a different material, and I will do that. And I will just copy the material for that. So create a couple of copies of the original existing material. So I copy it inside of the nodes. That's not required, but that's good practice. And after I created the materials, now I have to link them up. So for each node, I have to basically tell it which material it belongs to. And yeah, I hook always up the corresponding material. And now every element has a different texture. And now we can change the Enotev texture material, and we can change the color for each material. So we make it a bit more colorful now. Now we can see that each part has a different material. Okay, so now it's quite colorful. So we can easily distinguish everything. And we will go back now. And it's not here yet, right? So now I have to import it. For that, I click on the float tag in the item library. This was generated by the import, and now the import is generated, and now it's here in the item library, and I can drag it in. Yes, and by default we look at a very bad angle at it. And now I will do a small trick. I will copy the proper values from my prepared text mode here. So we can go to the text mode and replace both the camera and the UI boxes element with something that's already prepared. This is just setting a couple of magic numbers. So the camera has to scale it a bit so it really matches perfectly the canvas and the model. And yeah, we now look 90% orthogonal on top of the model. Everything is scaled correctly, everything is fine. And we can also look at this from in the 3D editor, no problem. You see the camera, there's a light in the middle, great. Okay, now I want to go back to my model. And actually here in the navigator, there's a nice small preview. When I hover on it, and in the context menu, I can now go inside it using go into component. And now I can drill into the component, and yeah, now we are in the component again. And yes, like you see, the form editor is empty again. And now I'm opening the 3D editor. And now I add a timeline. So I can create animations. And I don't want to have an animation in here, just a timeline. So the actual animation will be one level above. I will show that later. But we now have the timeline. And now I want to create this animation. So for that, I have to create keyframes, and I want to animate two things, the X property, the X translation, and also the opacity. I start with the opacity. So I set it to 0, but before I do that, I have to set the record button because now it will generate keyframes instead of simply changing the property. So first I set it to 0, then I insert another keyframe with 0 because I want to stay at 0 for a while, and then a bit later I want to get it 1. So it will fade in at some point in time. And I do something similar for the translation later, but first let's check. You see when I drag the handle how it works. So now it's a nice fade in of this element. That's good. Okay. Now we can animate the translation. For that I go to the first keyframe where basically I want to start the animation. I drag it out. So now I create keyframes here. And then I can use this here on the left if I click it. So basically we'll always go to the next keyframe of this property. For X and Y nothing happened because there is no next. But for opacity I jump directly to the next keyframe so I don't have to manually worry about snapping or so. So now everything is nicely aligned, and then I can remove the Y. I don't care. And now you see the animation at the beginning, it's invisible, I don't care. And then there is a fade in and it goes in there. Good. Now we have a nice small animation for this part. I turn off the record button. That's important because the record button, you never want accidentally creating keyframes. So immediately turn it off after you used it. And now I will add textures. So first in the item library, I look for textures. It's part of the 3D items. I want to keep the timeline. Okay. We also have a search filter. Maybe let's use that to find it faster. And there's texture. And now I will drag in textures because for each material I want now to apply a texture. But I don't want to apply a texture from an image, JPEG or some texture format. The texture will basically be populated from Qt Quick items that are defining the UI. I will show that later. And because I do that one level above and we have to expose those textures as property, it's important that I give them good names. And that's what I do. I give them proper names. Yeah, texture background, that's on. Field, that's a big field. And I can check in the 3D view what is what, right? That's important. And now create with last one. And then with copy and paste, I will create another one. Give it a good name. Yeah, those textures currently are not hooked up. That's what I will do after this. So now, after I renamed the last one, now I will hook them up with the materials, right? I have these materials. I have always to check what it is. This is the background. And then I have this diffuse map property, and here I choose the proper texture. And I do that for all the elements. Here, double check that I'm really on the correct element. Again, diffuse map, and check, select the correct texture. Okay, and now each texture has a source property, which would be an image, an URL or something like that. But we care about the source item, and we export that as a so-called alias property. So it's accessible from the outside when we use this component. And then we can assign Qt Quick items to those properties later. I will show how this looks in text on the board top. Yeah, that's how it looks. Okay, now I do another trick. I will basically copy and paste in a finished version, which is more or less the same thing with just more animation. We'll see that. So I just paste in a different version. It has now a couple of more keyframes. But other than that, there is no real difference. There's only one more thing that I did. I also exported the current timeline as a property of this component. So where we are in this timeline is now a property of this component one level above, and we can then control it from there. Yeah, you saw the animation got a bit more complicated. Okay, now we are here. Now we see nothing because we still have this orthographic view, right? And yeah, there's no shadows, nothing. So it's just gray. And now I will pretend I built the 2D UI in parallel. I will just do a short mock-up and then we also replace it by something more nicely. But I just want to show what we would do, right? We create an item of the correct size, and then we in that item we build our UI using rectangles and text items and so on. So we drag in a rectangle, another one, resize them. We can give it a color, or we also have this nice presets for gradients. We can use that. Okay. We would now build our UI that way, but I also want to speed up this a bit. So I basically replace this by something that I prepared before. So what I will now paste in is basically also just rectangles with a bit of text and nice gradients. There's two small things. These two things are a component, and in one case it's actually not required. We just replace it here with a rectangle. You can do that in the text mode. So I really like the text mode for these kind of things. You can correct things, you can use copy and paste to get something over from a different document and so on. Yeah, and there's still the title bar. That's a component. I will talk a bit about that. So it's a component defined in a different file, and because the file is missing right now, it doesn't work. And I will just auto comment it. So you can always go to the text mode and work in the text mode if you like that. You can of course also do that in the tool. We could, but then you can't do things like pasting in parts of a different file. It's not that easy. Okay. Yeah. As you see that there are a couple of shapes here, and the component is gone now, and it's just basically UI. And I gave this, you can see that in the navigator on the left, I gave that kind of names like background and so on. And now we have to assign those items to the properties we created. Unfortunately, those properties don't show up in the property editor at this point in time, hopefully in the next version. So we have to do that in text right now. And yeah, I've prepared those properties, and I just assign them the Qt Quick items. And a few tricks. The text editor is always synchronized with the selection of the navigator, so that's how you can easily jump to items in text if you need that. So that's how I got to the UI boxes so fast. And yeah, now I just write down these bindings. And I assign to each texture now a Qt Quick item. And that means instead of a static texture, each item, each of these panels will have as a texture the Qt Quick item dynamically, right? So the Qt Quick item changes, then also the texture changes. So it's really like real-time textures in that way. So you can also animate those later. And the last one. Okay, now let's go back. Oh, yeah. Why it's not working? As you can see, the top bar is a bit changed. You see it now. There's a difference from before, but the other items are still missing. So why is that? I know why it's on, because we animated them, right? They are invisible by default on frame 00, and you see that here in the property editor. They are not there. So we have to change the timeline current frame to basically animate it so we see something. That's a bit confusing in this case, so it really got me when I tried this out. But yeah, you see, if I now change this value, everything comes in. Now the trick is that I animate this value with a timeline on this level, so to get basically the animation running again. And in this case, I also want an animation here that runs for 10 seconds or so. That will be the startup animation. And now I create a keyframe with 0. Record button is important. And then I create another keyframe with 1000 because the timeline range was 1 to 1000, right? And now you see if I drag it on this level, do not forget to touch on the record button, we trigger the animation of the 3D model. Okay, that's cool, right? This is still a bit boring because we don't see shadows. We still have this default orthogonal view, which should be the end of the animation. So we now turn it also around a bit. And why I do that, there's one thing you saw that the text is actually missing. This is why I turned the title into a component. So right now this is the limitation. It will not show the child items of the item that we assigned as a texture in the editor. We'll do so in the runtime, but not in the editor, unless you turn it into a component. So now I created this small rotation here, and now I can have basically the 3D we have 3D animations, but I have the one from my level and the one from the component level in parallel, right? So we have this small rotation, and then everything flies in. Yeah. Now I will switch to a finished version of that, because now there would be, of course, a lot of work to create a lot of keyframes and a lot of animations, but nothing new. So this is basically the same thing, which one difference is that the component is now here, and we should see the title bar, and you can see that for the title bar also the text rendering works. And yeah, there's a lot more in the timeline here. So it's fading in. So I created keyframes for scaling and also for opacity of the whole 3D element to make it fade in the beginning. Then there is again the timeline frame animation of the 3D parts moving in. Here is this nice spotlight here that I also animated a bit. And you can see that also the 2D elements are animated. We don't see that in the 3D view, but in the 2D view we see that the text elements fade in and so on. And I could have moved everything to components, and then I would have a perfect preview also in the form editor, but I didn't. I wanted to show this limitation because it's important to know it's still there. It's not a limitation when we later run this with a preview. And yeah, you see that the text elements, they don't show up. Why the component on this level doesn't have. It's basically inside the component, and then it works. Okay. Yeah, now we have this really nice animation. There's also animation on the 2D parts. The good morning is scaling a bit. You can really sync them up right now. Right? You can really sync everything, the 2D and the 3D animation, so they fit together. Of course, you would probably fine-tune this even further, but let's run this now so we get an impression what's the result. So we have this fade-in animation. And this is something that's kind of common. You see that quite often in demo videos or so. You could now even do that for the real application. Probably that's a bit over the top. You wouldn't do that in a real application, but maybe you do it for one small view or one specific part, or maybe you already have 3D content. And yeah, I just wanted to show this. We have the spline editor. We also have a full-blown curve editor. So you can always add the easing curves with the small editor you just saw, or we can also edit it here, where we see basically all the keyframes together and all the tangents, and we can basically adjust it. This is basically the more powerful view than the keyframe view. But for simple stuff, I prefer the keyframe view and also to set up things. But then for fine-tuning, sometimes this view is a lot better. So because you now can see all the tangents together and then move them. Yeah, with this we are mostly done. So I want to say thank you, and I hope you got an impression what's possible with Qt Quick 3D and what you can already do. This is just one thing you could do, and also how to embed 2D content in the 3D scene again. This might also be if you have a model, you want to have labels or so that are driven by Qt Quick, by 2D elements. Yeah. And I also wanted to show that you can do quite complicated animations. Yeah, and with that, thank you. And then you are free to ask questions. So we are now at the QA. Thank you very much.